This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Thousands protest in Sudan against deal between Prime Minister Hamdok and military. Libya election panel rejects Gaddafi's son as presidential candidate. And concern as South Africa detects new coronavirus variant. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi, and for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. And tonight I'm alongside my colleague Uche, who has our business headlines. Uche.
Thank you, Richard. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Ghana increases its key interest rate to 14.5%. And investors in Nigeria's manufacturing sector call for better electricity prices. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to Richard.
Thank you so much, Uche. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. Great to have you along with us for this hour. Let's begin in Sudan, where thousands of Sudanese protesters Thursday staged rallies against a deal struck between General Abdel Fattah el-Burhan and reinstated Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok. The protesters took to the streets of the capital Khartoum and other cities to mount pressure on the military leaders. The top general seized power and detained Prime Minister Hamdok a month ago. It is only after international condemnation and mass protests that General Burhan reinstated Hamdok. Hamdok, who has been prime minister in the transitional government, said on Wednesday that he had partnered with the military to, quote, stop the bloodshed, close quote, and to, quote, not squander the gains of the last 2 years, close quote. But 12 out of 17 ministers from a bloc calling for a purely civilian rule have rejected Hamdok's strategy of engaging with the military and resigned on Monday. Well, for more on this, we are joined by Naba Muad'Din in Khartoum. Naba, welcome to the program. Welcome to Africa Live. Naba, what more can you tell us about Thursday's protest?
Thank you. The protest erupted not only in Khartoum but different Sudanese states and cities, mainly condemning the pact signed between the military and the Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, because the protesters are fundamentally objecting this deal, saying the guardianship by the military and Abdallah Hamdok is refused, and also there is a lack of confidence with the military, and they don't want any partnership with the military because they think after 2 years of partnership, the military took over the power in one night. So the main slogan was no partnership, no negotiation, no compromisement, and no legitimacy. People rallied in different streets and main cities, and the number was big. Police used tear gas to disperse the crowds. There was no excessive use of violence, but still the police used tear gas, and it's reported that some protesters were arrested in Al-Gadarif city in eastern Sudan. People are planning for more protests because they think a partnership with the military will bring a crisis again to the table and will reproduce the crisis, which is the confidence crisis between the military wing and the civilian wing.
All right, Naba, interesting turn of events there. Naba, that brings me to my next question. Now, the deal. Let's talk a bit about the deal. The deal struck between the military and the Prime Minister Hamdok stipulates that all political detainees be released. Have they?
Actually, only few detainees were released, not more than 4 detainees, and some reports said 3. And others are still detained without accusing them with any accusations or even justifying why they are detained. So it was also one of the reasons of the protest today, because they said it's so obvious that they can't build confidence again between the military and civilians, even if Abdullah Hamdok wants this confidence to be rebuilt and to move forward in this partnership. it was one of the clues, or it was one of the things that the protesters protested. They said even the promise of releasing the detainees was not fulfilled or not achieved. So how can they trust the military again, and how can they trust this partnership will be successful this time?
All right, Naba Muhyiddin, let's leave it there for now. Thank you for that update and report. Let's turn our attention to other significant news in Somalia, where Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab militant group have claimed responsibility for Thursday's attack in the Somali capital, Mogadishu, that left at least 8 people dead and tens injured. Militants launched a suicide attack on a UN security convoy using a vehicle laden with explosives in the early hours of Thursday. Ali Hussein, a journalist based in Mogadishu, tells us more.
According to school officials, the administration of the school, which was affected by the explosion, children in the school were among those people who were wounded in the explosion. But the school administration said that there were no deaths reported among children in the school. They said only 7 children who were in the school by then were wounded. It is worth noting that the spokesperson of the Somali police was speaking to the Somali media, said that schools were closed on Thursday. There were no students present at the scene of the explosion when the explosion happened. But a report from the school administration says otherwise. Al-Shabaab, as you said, has claimed responsibility for this attack, saying that it targeted an AU convoy that was passing along the road. But the target, according to witness and according to the state officials, was private security that was escorting a UN vehicle that was heading to Halane base camp. None of the staff in UN has been wounded. So it seems that Al-Shabaab is trying to target, is trying to increase attacks in the capital, but the Somali government is also trying to improve the security in the capital, and there are more police presence along the roads, as I said.
The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for an unconditional and immediate ceasefire to the fighting in Ethiopia. The call came as Ethiopian media reported that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed had joined the front line amid an escalating year-long conflict. CGTN spoke to the African Union Special Envoy to Ethiopia, Olusegun Obasanjo, about the conflict and efforts to de-escalate tensions. Let's take a listen.
I believe it's going reasonably well. I will say not as well as I would have wanted to see, but it's going reasonably well. I'm talking to African leaders because they have to bring pressure to bear on all sides for a ceasefire to be achieved. I'm also talking to our development partners, again, for them to bring pressure to bear to get unconditional ceasefire. Until we get ceasefire, the issue of humanitarian access will be difficult. The issue of restoration of where things have been damaged or where things have been stopped will be difficult. We have to start building confidence and trust back in Ethiopia and between Ethiopia and some of her neighbors. It is very, very essential because, as I say to all sides, you've been looking at yourself from the sight of a gun. Now you have to put down the gun and really do a handshake. And that's, you start building confidence, you start building trust, And the earlier we can get to that, the better.
Let's turn our attention to Libya now, where the lawyer of Saif al-Islam Gaddafi has announced an appeal against a decision by the country's election committee to disqualify the former ruler's son from running in the presidential polls. 24 other candidates have also been dropped from the race. A total of 98 aspirants had registered to run. Gaddafi was ruled out by the commission as he was sentenced to death for alleged war crimes in 2015. Eastern Commander Khalifa Haftar may also be locked out of the election, as he is said to have a U.S. nationality, which he has denied. He is also under scrutiny for war crimes that he is accused of committing during his assault on Tripoli. South African scientists say they have detected a new COVID variant. So far, 22 positive cases of the strain have been recorded in the country. Experts are reporting that the variant is said to have a high number of mutations and is causing a resurgence of infections. It has also been detected in Botswana and Hong Kong. Health experts say they're working to understand its potential implications. The World Health Organization has held a meeting on this. South Africa was the first country to detect the highly transmissible Delta variant last year. China says it has provided over 1.8 billion doses of coronavirus vaccines worldwide. The latest shipment includes 700,000 doses for Laos. The Southeast Asian country has reported a surge of COVID-19 infections in October. China is the major source of coronavirus vaccines for Laos after receiving nearly 7 million doses of Chinese vaccines. Beijing says ASEAN countries are a priority in its fight against the coronavirus. China will provide an additional 150 million doses to ASEAN partners, plus $150 million in aid over the next 3 years. New Zealand will launch a new COVID strategy next Friday as it comes out of a 3-month lockdown, and it's test driving a vaccine pass system ahead of what some people there are calling Freedom Day. Owen Paulin tells us more.
Well, after 100 days of lockdown here in Auckland, there's a lot of people who really are desperate for a haircut. That's the reason why the hairdressers are going first to trial the system. But the vaccine pass or certificate is available to anyone who has been double vaccinated, and that currently amounts to 84% of the eligible population. People can either download the pass onto their phones or have it posted to them as a hard copy. And the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says the pass will be their ticket to freedom. As you mentioned in the introduction, hairdressers here in Auckland have finally been allowed to reopen today. So they'll be the first retailers to test the pass system before other retailers and hospitality venues open up next Friday. However, there's already been some confusion about the verification process. The Ministry of Health says that the QR code on the pass must be scanned for people to gain entry. However, the Prime Minister has said that a visual check of the pass is okay.
Kenya is set to become one of the first countries in Africa to enforce a vaccine mandate next month. Authorities say those without proof of vaccination after December the 21st will not be able to access public or private services. CGTN's Robert Nagila has that story.
At a bus stop in Nairobi Central Business District, passengers vaccinated against COVID-19 and those yet to receive a single dose share a bus to their destinations. But that may soon come to an end after the government announced plans to introduce a vaccine mandate.
Everybody seeking in-person government services should be fully vaccinated and proof of vaccination availed by December 21st.
From the 21st of December, Kenyans will be required to show proof of vaccination to use public transport, travel by rail or air, visit a pub, restaurant or hotel, or visit a game reserve. Unvaccinated Kenyans will also have no access to government services. Public transport operators say it is difficult to implement the mandate, which comes into force during the busiest period, the Christmas holidays.
We have not gone through any awareness campaign to be able to establish if one has been vaccinated or not. We just hear there is a secret number. We have not been told how to detect it.
There are still no details on how this directive by the government will be implemented. But if, like me, you've received both doses of the vaccine, all one has to do is log in to the Ministry of Health portal and your vaccine certificate, complete with the QR code, comes up. According to legal experts, the government is within its powers to enforce a vaccine mandate.
Being a pandemic, under the Public Health Act, government can gazette anything that is meant to protect its citizens. The government has a moral obligation, the constitutional obligation, to protect the 44 million Kenyans.
Just over 2.5 million Kenyans have been fully vaccinated, about 9% of the adult population. Early this year, the government set a target of vaccinating 10 million Kenyans this year, but says there's been a slowdown in the uptake of vaccines over the past couple of months. On Friday, authorities will launch a major vaccination drive across the country to encourage more Kenyans to get the jab ahead of the vaccine mandate. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
You're watching Africa Live. We'll see you on the other side of the break with more news stories. Here's what's ahead. New UN data shows intensified violence against women during the COVID-19 pandemic. And delegates deliberate on positive masculinity at inaugural African Union meeting.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the front
clear
line.
View of this front line position.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thank you for sticking with us. The UN has released a new report highlighting intensified gender-based violence against women during the COVID-19 pandemic. The new data comes as the world marks the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. CGTN's Joy Karuki-Juma has that story.
The conversation on gender-based violence is far from over. The UN Women Report shows that the COVID-19 pandemic is acting as an incubator for more violent acts against women.
We had these rates affirming that 1 in 3 women, they continued facing suffering physical and or sexual violence. And most of these forms of violence, they have been experienced by their own intimate partners.
Exposure was highest amongst women in Kenya, Morocco, Jordan, and Nigeria, while those in Paraguay were the least affected by reported such experiences. Overall, 1 in 4 women reported that violence against women most commonly experienced is verbal abuse or denial of basic resources.
For the affected women, the abuse can be experienced while at home or even when interacting with people outdoors.
Looking at specific age groups, women who are most vulnerable, we see that younger women aged 18 to 49 years of age were the most affected population, but also women who are employed during the pandemic. The findings reveal that 1 in 4 women are feeling less safe at home, as conflict has increased within households during the pandemic. Outside of their homes, women are feeling less safe as well, with 40% of respondents saying that they feel less safe walking around alone at night since COVID began.
Policy recommendations of what the UN has named a shadow pandemic include allocating enough services and resources to cater to victims. The report acts as a prelude to 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Joy Kiruki-Juma, CGTN.
Meanwhile, male leaders from Africa have converged in the Democratic Republic of Congo for the inaugural African Union Men's Conference on Positive Masculinity. DRC President Felix Tshisekedi is chairing the meeting in his capacity as the chairperson of the AU. Rwanda's President Paul Kagame is among other African leaders in Kinshasa attending the meeting, which seeks to mobilize commitment and galvanize action by men in leadership to accelerate the prevention and the elimination of violence against women and girls in Africa. Let's bring in CGTN's Chris Ochemringa in Kinshasa for the latest. Chris, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Can you tell us more about that men's conference taking place in Kinshasa? Chris? Chris, can you tell us more about this conference in Kinshasa? Well, apparently Chris can't hear us. Hopefully we'll get Chris a little later on in the program. It's an important conversation to have. But let's move on. We have John Paul Marunga. He's a program officer at the End Sexual Violence Equality Now. He joins us via Zoom from Nairobi. Mr. Paul Marunga, welcome to the program. Thank you for taking time to speak to us here on Africa Live. Now, the men's conference is focusing on positive masculinity in leadership. What is positive masculinity, and how important is it ending the violence against women and girls?
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. Positive masculinity is basically embracing being a man, but a man who promotes healthy relationships. So, there's the whole concept of moving from a boy to being a man, and so many societies in Africa have different rites of passage. For instance, there's circumcision, there's marriage, there are a lot of practices. In some cases, it used to be you kill a lion, you're able to hold a spear, then you become a man. But then when we talk about positive masculinity now, there are certain negative elements or toxic elements of the masculinity, as we know, being a man, which includes issues like violence, being aggressive. So then these are some of the elements that we are shedding off and saying that we want men who are able to embrace healthy relationships, be it social relationships, be it career relationships, so that we avoid violence. You've seen across Africa and in most cities, for instance, in Nairobi, in Johannesburg, in Lagos, there are areas where women cannot pass. There are streets where women cannot pass or girls cannot pass at a certain time because they're afraid they will be raped or they will be sexually assaulted. So above being robbed or being mugged, there's that element of sexual violation when it comes to women as opposed to men. So then that's the element that we are running away from and saying as a society, and starting from the top leadership, the presidents,
all right,
encouraging our young boys to be able to embrace equality, gender equality, and avoid violence against women, especially sexual violence.
All right, Jean-Paul Marunga, you've illuminated some very important points there, but let's talk a bit more about that meeting. The meeting comes at a time when gender data shows unprecedented surges in violence against women and girls, due in part to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. My question to you is there enough resolve within the continent to end gender inequalities that make women and girls vulnerable?
Yes, indeed, there is goodwill, and this starts from the leadership of the African Union. And recently you heard there was the global partnership on education, which is basically also focusing on education for the girl child and for women, so that there is empowerment, especially for women and girls who for a long time have been missing out in some of these opportunities. So at the global and at the regional level, at the African Union level, there are so many initiatives. Remember, there is the End Child Marriage Initiative by the African Union. There is the Salima Initiative to end harmful practice of FGM. There are several officers, good ambassador officers, who are moving around the continent to ensure that our countries implement action plans that gear towards gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. The only challenge we are seeing is that individual countries at the national level are not embracing this as much, so that we have so many policies, we have action plans, but then there is very little implementation. There is very little budgeting, for instance, for education for girls, for example, economic empowerment of women. Not so many countries have programs that target women for instance, in terms of entrepreneurship. So this is what we are seeing at the national level, that there's not much effort as we have at the regional level, where we have commitments. We have the Maputo Protocol, we have the Violence Against Women Declaration, which is coming soon after this meeting in Kinshasa. So then at the regional level, we are seeing a lot of positivity, but then at the national level, we want to encourage our countries and the leadership of our individual countries to be able to implement now these policies, because we have very good policies which are in place at the regional level, but they're not being implemented at the national level. And that's what we are now encouraging and calling out our leaders to implement these policies. And for them to be implemented, there must be money, there must be budgeting. So for instance, if we look at budgeting for contraceptive, budgeting for sexual and reproductive health rights, budgeting for education, budgeting for health, maternal health, these are things which our countries now need to prioritize, because these are the things that lead to violence against women and lead to disempowerment of women. When they are seeking these services, we have cases of girls being exploited sexually when they are seeking sanitary towels. So these are some of the things we want our countries now to budget for.
All right, Jean-Paul Murunga, thank you so much for bringing all of that there to light and sharing your perspective. I want to bring Chris Ochemringa back into this conversation. We lost him a little earlier. He's back, hopefully. Chris, thank you for joining us again. Chris, tell us more about this men's conference taking place in Kinshasa.
So this conference has brought together leaders from across Africa to discuss ways and means of eliminating violence against women. The president of Rwanda, Senegal, South Africa, Ghana and Congo-Brazzaville, and the former president of Liberia are all here meeting with their host, President Felix Tshisekedi, to find ways and means of ending violence against women. The conference is being held as the rest of the world marks the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. So basically, the organizers of this conference they've invited these senior leaders, they call them men leaders, engaged in the positive masculinity to end the scourge of violence against women, because they believe these leaders hold very senior positions and they can influence their governments, to increase the budget of the judiciary, to enforce discipline in their armies so that, women are protected. They want men leaders to use their positions of authority and strength to protect women as opposed to sexually abusing them. And for very long, women organizations, women activists, international and foreign groups have been advocating for the end of gender-based violence and sexual abuse and exploitation, but the practice has persisted. And so they believe by involving men who are in these high-level positions, it will have a greater impact in reducing this problem across the continent.
All right, Chris Ochemringa, let's leave it there. Thank you so much for staying on top of that story for us. Time now for our business segment, so it's over to you, Uche.
Thank you, Richard. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Ghana increases its key interest rate to 14.5%. And investors in Nigeria's manufacturing sector call for better electricity prices.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
And let's start off in Ghana. The country has raised its key interest rate by 100 basis points to 14.5%. That's as the government strives to manage the high cost of living. Now, the central bank hopes the adjustment will help tackle the depreciation of its local currency, the cedi, against the dollar. But of course, some analysts say it could reduce investments in the country, as CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai now reports.
It's the first time Ghana is raising the interest rate in more than 5 years. The central bank says raising it to 14.5% will tackle the high cost of living. But some analysts believe it will also cut investment.
It's going to bring down the rate at which banks can actually borrow from the central bank, because now the cost of borrowing from the central bank has gone up. So banks will necessarily not have access to cheaper funds from the central bank. Vis-a-vis companies also not have access to cheaper funds. And this can, of course, is going to slow down economic growth and, of course, investment. But in the wisdom of these tools, right, it's more like a necessary evil.
The central bank says it raised the lending rate to 14.5% due to increase in the cost of goods and services and a fiscal deficit of 9.5%.
Inflation has increased consistently from 7.5% in May to 11% in October. The government had projected Ghana's economy to grow by 5% this year, but that target is far from being achieved as the year winds to a close.
Still, the government has estimated 5.8% economic growth next year, slightly higher than the IMF's projection of 4%. Analysts say it may be difficult to achieve the target as the country has yet to fully recover from the pandemic.
You don't have control over how the health of the people are, globally and locally. It's very hard to make very strong economic projections, okay? Because when there are no economic activities, those growth numbers will not happen. And so for me, that's why I still stand. I think it's to be difficult, but let's see if we can achieve that.
The government hopes as the country gradually recovers from the disruptions caused by the pandemic, and while it steps up its vaccination drive, the economy will return to pre-pandemic levels next year. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Meanwhile, in Nigeria, investors in the manufacturing sector are lamenting over what they've termed as uneven electricity pricing. The Manufacturers Association insists that a mismatch in government policies, as well as differences in electricity pricing across the country, poses grave challenges for the sector. That's in the face of epileptic power supply. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam with more.
Business is at its peak for 27-year-old fashion designer Jumat Abdulaziz, with lots of fabrics to sew and deliver to his customers before Christmas. But erratic power supply is hampering his work. And aside paying roughly $100 monthly for electricity subscription, Jumat spends an additional $90 to run his backup generator.
Sometimes when there is no light, I will buy fuel so that I can meet up with my schedule for the day. It affects my business a lot because sometimes in a week we do have lights, maybe twice or once in a week, sometimes not every day.
Manufacturers and business owners like Jumat are complaining that their running costs been taking a toll on outputs. That's compounded by uneven pricing policy. For instance, where businesses and manufacturers in the nation's capital, Abuja, pay an average 38 naira for a unit of electricity, those in the commercial capital, Lagos, pay about 33 naira. In northwest Kaduna State, it costs 29 naira, and in northeast Yola, it's almost twice as much, at an average 51 naira.
For manufacturers, this is going to be a huge problem because all manufacturers actually serve the same market. So if you have a situation where the manufacturer of, for instance, a particular product in Lagos, where the tariff is lower because of the demand-supply structure, is paying lower than the manufacturer, for instance, in Maiduguri or Kano, where the structure is different, it means that that manufacturer in Kano is now at a disadvantage.
The manufacturing sector has seen an uptake since the economy was reopened after the COVID-19 lockdown. And the Manufacturers Association wants a tariff structure that will give industry operators a level playing field.
We must find a way of ensuring that these distortions in the market do not arise from a policy framework that clearly gives preference to one set of manufacturers. And it disturbs growth, because it does mean that investment will be tailored or perhaps directed towards those areas where the tariff is low. And to a large extent, therefore, you will have a problem of regional balance in terms of the growth of the economy itself and the growth of investment.
Nigeria, with its current gas, hydro and solar power plants, is capable of generating 12,500 megawatts of electricity, but struggles to dispatch an average 5,000 megawatts, not sustainable for its 200 million strong population. More so for the manufacturing sector that relies heavily on power to thrive. Manufacturers want industry players to ramp up power supply and create more uniform pricing across the country. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
And in Egypt, a new ride-hailing company is helping people with disabilities to run their errands by offering them comfortable transport. Now, there are millions of people with disabilities in the country who say they struggle with accessibility and easy movement. CGTN's Beryl Oro with more.
In 2006, Joe Yahmour was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and his reduced ability to carry out daily tasks is what got him thinking of ways to facilitate his transport across his hometown, Cairo. Joe used to rely mainly on the help of his family and friends to run errands, due to the lack of alternatives and infrastructure set up to assist people like him in Egypt, until he set up his own company in 2019 to bridge the gap.
The idea behind Rati is that we provide comfort and freedom in transportation to people like me, people with disabilities, so we are not limited in the places we go to. Instead, we can be transported to any place we need. And even if it is not out of need, but just for fun, to be part of society, to go out, have fun, work, go to the doctor's office, live a practically normal life instead of having restrictions because of the limits imposed by our illness or the existing methods of transportation.
His company, Rahti, Arabic for My Comfort, offers people with disabilities the opportunity to independently move around without much help.
I used to find it difficult to run my errands, and so I used to have to cancel many of them. But with this service, it has become very easy. This service helps me run all my errands.
A quick phone call 24 hours ahead is all that is needed to book a ride for the duration of the customer's choice.
We currently have 2 vehicles and a minibus that can take up to 20 people in wheelchairs. Our goal and vision is for people with disabilities to live a very normal life without being a burden onto anyone, but instead become productive and work, maybe even with us in the company. Because nobody knows better than us what services we need.
Joe and his co-founder Khalid Nasir are working on more options that can transport passengers in wheelchairs. The company also aims to offer gainful employment for people with disabilities. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Now, the 2021 Guangzhou Auto Show is currently underway in southern China's Guangzhou city, with the expo being the last major event for the country's automobile industry this year. There has been visible excitement as exhibitors from all over the world are showcasing more than 1,000 new vehicles. Now, new energy vehicles, they're taking the limelight, and our reporter Huang Fei has more from the expo.
Electric coupe concept, electric supercar SUV, high-end cars. Established car giants and upstarts are competing to show off their latest models in 16 halls at the Canton Fair complex, spread over an area of 220,000 square meters. There are nearly 1,020 vehicles on display, the highest in recent years, despite a reduction in the total number of exhibitors. But there is also a bright spot. There has been a steady stream of visitors to the expo, with many of them keen to see and experience the latest green cars on display.
I've come to check out the latest new energy vehicles from various companies. I plan to buy an electric vehicle because they're intelligent, environmentally friendly, and gasoline-free. It is also cheaper to power a car with electricity.
I want to buy an EV because it's popular and there is now an established charging network across the country. EVs are convenient for commuting and cost less money.
At this year's Guangzhou Auto Show, more than 240 models are new energy vehicles, up 70% from a year ago. Some companies have launched their latest electric vehicles with advanced technologies, such as high-performance batteries that can run for 1,000 kilometers on a single charge. Electrification is not the only bet. Some companies believe vehicles in the future will be more intelligent and autonomous. It'll be more than a means of transportation for people. Instead, it'll be an eco-friendly and smart helper that knows you well.
With the advent of the autonomous driving era, a vehicle would not be just a means for transportation. It could be your workplace, resting place, diner, or a self-driving delivery vehicle. Your hands, eyes, and feet will be free so that you can do more things in the car.
Vehicles on display at the expo reflect the changing trends in the world's biggest auto market, especially at a time when the entire automobile industry is undergoing a massive transformation. But one thing is becoming increasingly clear. Vehicles of the future will be more electric, autonomous, connected, share, and intelligent. Huang Fei, CGTN, Guangzhou.
And that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but still to come on Global Business Africa, we'll bring you the latest on a new COVID-19 variant discovered in South Africa. Of course, all that coming up top of the hour. For now, back to you, Richard.
Thank you so much, Uche. Don't go away. The news continues right here on Africa Live. Here's a peek at what's ahead. Residents of Tunisia's village protest massive toxic landfill.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival, and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Africa Live. We appreciate your company. The death of a 21-year-old youth blamed on a mosquito bite has led to renewed protests in the Tunisian town of Aghreb after local authorities reopened a dump site. The victim's family, as well as environmental activists, are leading a campaign for the removal of the dump site. An activist also died on November the 8th during the protest. Adnan Shwashi reports.
Mabrouka Ibrahim is the mother of Yusra, who she said died in 2019 after being bitten by a mosquito that came from a toxic trash site in the town of Aghreb, in the governorate of Sfax in Tunisia. Mabrouka opposes the reopening of the nearby rubbish dump.
The mosquito bite turned my daughter blind, plunged her into a coma, and killed her. She's a healthy girl who's never had any health problems. The mosquito came from the dump site. I don't want my neighbors to lose their children too. We never sit outside the house. The air is polluted with offensive odors and smells. We don't breathe clean air. I call for the immediate closure of the dump site or more people will die.
Yusra's brother, Ala ibn Ibrahim, joined the protest movement in Aghreb calling for the dump site's removal. He witnessed Abdelrazak Lasheb's death 2 weeks ago. The 35-year-old environmental activist died following exposure to tear gas during protests against the reopening of the landfill site.
The protester died in front of my eyes. He's my neighbor and we were protesting together against the dump site when police fired tear gas. The regional authorities claimed that he died of a heart attack. The victim was transferred to the hospital suffering from asphyxia. He never had any health problems before the incident.
Walid Merdesi is a former advisor to the Minister of the Environment and Local Affairs. The waste management expert explains that several waste valorization projects have failed in Tunisia. Waste valorization is the process of reusing, recycling, or composting waste materials.
The waste management crisis is a national challenge. It concerns all regions. First, it is a financial problem because the municipalities do not have the resources to valorize waste instead of dumping it. The second problem is that the state cannot find or buy land to open new dump sites. The population does not trust the authorities.
Residents of the town of Mahras in Sfax also staged protests to reject the project of the Environment Department to transform the area into a landfill or waste valorization center. The authorities decided to put on hold the project after mounting pressure in the coastal region.
The town is located on the coastline. Its economy is based on tourism and agriculture. The landfill project is located 1 kilometer from the highway connecting Sfax to Tunis and Sfax to the south. The same site is about 200 meters from the nearest residential complex. We will not accept any dump site or the so-called waste valorization project.
Yusra bin Brahim's grieving family continues to visit her grave in the town of Agereb. More than 2 years after Yusra's death, they are still calling for justice as well as the removal of dump sites from the area.
Tunisian President Kais Saied met with the representatives of civil society organizations and environmental activists who protested against the opening of new landfill sites in their regions. The head of state instructed the environment minister to find an immediate and long-term solution to the garbage crisis. Abdel Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And we are not done just yet. We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Here's what's ahead. In sports, Ethiopian great Haile Gebrselassie pledges to join the fight against rebel forces in his country.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sportsy